You know how a tiny seed of worry in a kid's mind can suddenly grow into a huge, scary tree? Well, what happened with young Ben and his dad George at that fancy event is exactly that kind of story. One that'll make you nod along and maybe even laugh a little by the end. It shows how things can get twisted, and how just a few simple words can change everything. But before we jump in, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city and state in the comments. We love seeing how far our stories reach and connecting with all of you. That morning started like any other in George's neat, modest home. The sun was just peeking through the blinds, promising a bright day. George, a man who valued hard work and loyalty, was already up. He'd worked for the Trump Organization for years, not in some flashy office, but quietly doing his part day after day. He was a good man. He was the kind of dad who always made sure his son Ben had his homework done and his shoelaces tied. But today, there was a different energy in the air. George was buttoning up a crisp gray polo, the one he reserved for special occasions, not his usual workdays. He glanced at himself in the mirror, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. Today was the employee appreciation event, and not just any event. Rumor had it that Mr. Trump himself, now President Trump, would be there. It was a big deal, a very big deal. "Ben, you almost ready, son?" George called out, his voice a little louder than usual. Ben, about 10 years old, shuffled into the hallway, tugging nervously at the hem of his gray t-shirt. He was a quiet boy with thoughtful brown eyes that sometimes seemed too worried for his age. Lately, those eyes carried even more concern. "Yeah, Dad," he replied softly. Ben mumbled, kicking at an invisible spot on the carpet. George smiled, trying to sound upbeat. "It's going to be a good day, Ben, a special day. You'll get to see where Dad works, and maybe, just maybe, we'll even see President Trump." Ben didn't look up. His stomach flipped, but not the good kind. A few nights ago, he'd sneaked out of his room for a glass of water and overheard his dad on the phone in the kitchen. George's voice was low and stressed. Ben caught only bits and pieces, words like cutbacks, restructuring, and the one that made his heart freeze, people being let go. His dad sounded so worried, and in Ben's 10-year-old mind, he pieced together a terrifying puzzle. This special event, the visit from the big boss, President Trump, it wasn't special at all. It was the day Mr. Trump might tell people, maybe even his dad, that they didn't have jobs anymore. The thought felt like a cold stone in his belly, as he imagined Mr. Trump as a giant, stern man from TV pointing a finger and saying, "You're fired," just like the older kids imitated. Ben's voice was small as he asked, "Do we have to go?" George frowned, concerned. "What's wrong, sport? I thought you'd be excited. It's not every day you get to—" He trailed off, noticing the real worry on Ben's face. Kneeling down to his son's level like in a photo he'd seen, George said softly, "Hey, it'll be fine. It's a celebration for all the hardworking folks. You'll be with me." Ben just nodded, but the stone in his stomach felt heavier. He didn't want to go. He didn't want to see his dad sad. He didn't want Mr. Trump anywhere near his dad. The car ride was mostly silent. George pointed out interesting buildings and chatted about the city, but Ben just stared out the window, his reflection showing a thoughtful, worried face. He imagined the scene, Mr. Trump on a big stage, his dad's name being called, and Ben squeezed his eyes shut. When they arrived at one of the grand Trump Organization properties, it was much bigger than Ben expected. Banners welcomed employees. Soft music played and people in sharp clothes mingled, laughing and chatting. On the surface, it looked happy, but to Ben it felt like a trap. Everyone was smiling, but were they all as scared as he was? George checked in at the reception desk, picked up name tags for himself and Ben. Then they entered a large ballroom filled with tables of snacks and drinks. Employees were everywhere, some excited, some nervous like his dad, but no one looked as terrified as Ben. He stayed close, his hand gripping the bottom of his dad's gray polo almost without thinking. "See, Ben? Lots of people here. It's a party," George said. George tried to sound cheerful as he said, "See, Ben?" He spotted a few colleagues and waved, hoping Ben would see this was a good place, that his dad was part of something important. But Ben's eyes kept darting around, searching for the man he was sure was there to bring bad news. Every tall man in a suit made his heart jump. After a while, a hush fell over the room, and a buzz of anticipation spread through the crowd as people turned toward the main entrance. Then he walked in, President Donald Trump, just like on TV but bigger, more real. He wore a dark blue suit, a crisp white shirt, and a patterned blue tie, with a small American flag pin shining on his lapel. Surrounded by serious-looking aides, he smiled, waved, and shook hands as he moved through the room. Ben felt his breath catch in his throat. He wanted to hide, pull his dad away, run. But George stood straighter, a nervous respect on his face. President Trump moved slowly, stopping to shake hands, exchange a few words, making each person feel like the center of his attention. He spoke to Ben as the boy's fear mixed with a strange sense of awe. This was the man who held his dad's future in his hands. George gently nudged Ben, whispering, "He's coming this way, son. Be polite now." Ben's heart pounded wildly, trapped like a bird against his ribs. He could barely breathe and wished the floor would swallow him whole. Then it happened. President Trump was right there in front of them, taller than Ben expected. His hair that familiar golden hue shining under the ballroom lights. George, trying to stay composed, extended his hand and said, "Mr. President, it's an honor. This is my son, Ben." Trump took George's hand in a firm, strong grip, his piercing blue eyes locking with George's for a moment, before flicking down to Ben. Frozen, Ben couldn't meet his gaze. His eyes were fixed on the shiny buckle of Trump's belt, then nervously dropped to the floor. He felt sick and trembled, hoping no one noticed. President Trump looked from Ben's downcast face back to George, pausing briefly with a slight frown. Was it curiosity? He tilted his head and said in his deep, commanding voice, "Well, hello there, Ben." Ben didn't move or speak, but he could feel. His dad's hand rested gently on his shoulder, a quiet reassurance. President Trump glanced at George, a flicker of amusement, and maybe concern in his eyes. "Your son seems a little jumpy," he said, his tone still friendly. Then came the question that made Ben's world freeze. Why is he afraid? Does he think I bite? He even let out a soft, dry chuckle. George looked flustered, opening his mouth to explain, probably to say Ben was just shy, but before he could speak, Ben's own voice broke through, a choked whisper that seemed to silence the room. Are you here to fire my dad?" The air turned heavy, the background noise of the ballroom fading away. George's grip tightened on Ben's shoulder, a silent, "Oh, son." Ben's cheeks burned with embarrassment. He wished he hadn't spoken, fearing he'd made everything worse, that Mr. Trump would be angry. Instead, the president's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He simply looked at Ben, then George, then back again. His smile disappeared, replaced by a genuine expression of puzzlement as if trying to solve an unexpected riddle. George began to stammer, "Mr. President, I'm sorry. There must be some misunderstanding." Trump raised a hand, not to cut George off harshly, but to say, "Hold on a second." He glanced back at Ben, who was still staring at the floor, bracing for the worst. Then President Trump did something unexpected. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't the big, flashy smile for the cameras. This one was smaller, almost gentle. He let out a short, familiar chuckle, not laughing at Ben, but more at the oddity of the moment. Leaning forward slightly, not to intimidate but to get closer, to Ben's eye level, though Ben still wouldn't look up, he repeated softly, "Fire your dad?" Then he clapped George firmly on the shoulder, a friendly gesture. "Young man," he said, eyes fixed where Ben's face would be if he looked up. "Your dad, George here, is one of our best, one of our most loyal. We don't fire people like George, we thank people like George." Ben slowly lifted his eyes just a little and saw President Trump's expression. No anger, just that surprised, almost kind smile. "This whole event," Trump continued, glancing around the room before returning his gaze to Ben, "is to say thank you. Thank you to people like your dad who work hard, show up every day, and believe in what we're doing. Loyalty, Ben. That's a very important thing. And your dad has it. George exhaled deeply, surprised he'd been holding his breath. His face, which had gone pale, now flushed with relief and pride. He looked down at Ben, a small, grateful smile touching his lips. Ben stared at President Trump, feeling the giant, scary tree of worry inside him begin to crumble, the cold stone in his stomach slowly melting away. Could he have really misunderstood everything? No, President Trump said with a nod to Ben. I'm not here to fire your dad. I'm here to tell him he's doing a great job and to thank him for bringing such a concerned son. He winked, a quick, friendly gesture. A small, shaky giggle escaped Ben. He couldn't help it. The relief bubbled out of him. President Trump grinned. That's better, he said, giving George's shoulder another pat. You've got a good boy here, George. A little worried, but good. Then his public persona snapped back into place. Enjoy the event, George. You too, Ben. With that, he moved on to the next group, confident and poised, handshakes resuming. George knelt beside Ben, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. See, buddy? I told you it was a celebration. His voice was thick with emotion. Ben looked up at his dad, eyes shining. He said, "You're one of the best," Ben whispered, a huge grin spreading across his face. The fear was gone, replaced by a bubbling pride that warmed his chest. His dad really was one of the best, and President Trump knew it. For the rest of the event, Ben was a different kid. He stayed close to his dad, but no longer hid. Instead, he looked around with open curiosity and even ate a cookie. When he saw President Trump across the room, he didn't feel scared anymore. He felt something else, something like, wow, that actually happened. George couldn't stop smiling. That brief moment of unexpected kindness and reassurance from the President of the United States meant more to him than any bonus or award. It was the acknowledgement, the personal touch, and seeing the fear leave. His son's face replaced by pride and relief that was priceless. Later, as they left the ballroom with the sun still shining bright, Ben walked with a bounce in his step, chattering about the snacks, a magic trick he'd seen in the corner, and of course what President Trump had said. Dad, Ben said, looking up at George, I'm sorry, I thought you know. George ruffled his hair gently. It's okay, son. Sometimes we all get things a little mixed up. The important thing is, it's all okay now. What began as a day filled with hidden dread for young Ben turned into a memory he'd probably share with his own kids someday. A story about being terrified to meet the president and how a few honest words changed everything. For George, it was a reminder that even in huge, powerful organizations and around influential people, it's the small human moments that truly matter. He went home feeling more valued and seen than he had in a long time. As for President Trump, he carried on with his day, shaking hands, giving speeches, leading the country. For him, maybe it was just one brief, unscripted interaction among hundreds, a quiet reminder of the real lives and families behind all the politics and policies. A moment where a few simple words could ease a child's fear. It just shows you never really know what's going on in someone else's mind, especially a kid's. And sometimes the simplest truths are the most powerful. So what do you think about that moment? Pretty incredible how a child's fear sparked such a direct and comforting encounter, right? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What went through your mind when Ben asked his question? And hey, if you enjoyed this story and want more like it, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. We appreciate you.